Good evening, everyone. I will call this Committee of Adjustment hearing to order. Just before we get started this evening, I will go through the kind of the protocols for tonight's meeting. We have 3 applications that all pertain to one property this evening. A little bit of housekeeping. If you have cell phones, if you could please place them on silent mode or turn them off. And if you're coming up to the podium to speak, please address questions through the chair and not directly to the person being asked the question. The first order of business once we start will be to ask any committee members if they have any conflicts of interest with any of the applications this evening, followed by any requests for deferrals or withdrawals on applications that are on the agenda. Secretary Treasurer will then read out each application noted on the agenda with a brief description and staff recommendation. Applicants or the agent for the applicant will be asked to come forward. There's a podium on the right here if they're here, or we'll bring them in online. They can introduce themselves, be allowed a short overview to add any further additional details that they wish to at that time. Following that, members of the public will be asked or have the opportunity to ask any questions that they might have on that, along with committee members. Any members of the public wishing to speak to an application will be asked to come forward, state their name and address for the record, try to limit their comments to 10 minutes, and they must present all questions or comments that pertain to that application in that time frame. Persons making a presentation may not necessarily be able to return to speak to the same application again. Following all comments, the applicant will be afforded some closing comments if desired. The committee will then present a decision in the form of a motion. The motion will be discussed and voted upon. If a vote is tied, the motion will be defeated and a new motion will be made. If a motion is defeated, new motions will be made until a decision has been reached. Notices of decision will only be provided to those persons who leave their name and addresses in writing with the Secretary Treasurer. There should be a sign-in page, I believe, on the blue table there on the right. And anyone that is watching online at home, they can also request that by emailing Diana Vesu at portcolborne.ca. That's diana.vasu at portcolborne.ca. Or you can call City Hall at 905-835-2900, extension 204, immediately following the meeting and leave a message with your name and address to achieve the same thing. It should also be noted that in order to be kept advised of any possible Ontario Land Tribunal hearings, persons must request and be sent a copy of the committee's decision on an application. So that's the process. With that, I'll ask if there's any conflicts of interest this evening. Not seeing any. Is there any request for deferrals of applications that you're aware of, Madam Secretary? None? So with that, I will turn over to the Secretary Treasurer for the first application, or bunch of applications, since there's only one property.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will now let in the applicant. He is joining virtually. He's being admitted now. Hi, Evan. Can you hear us? We can't hear you. There we go. Try now.
Hello.
Hey, you can hear us okay?
I can. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Perfect. Thank you for joining us.
I probably know half of you from the phone.
Okay. So on the agenda tonight, we have 1 consent application and 2 minor variance applications. Notice of the applications was circulated to the public on July 5th, 2023. The required agencies received notice of the applications on July 14th, 2023. A recommendation report for each application was prepared by planning staff and made publicly available on July 14th, 2023. All correspondence received by July 14th was addressed in the recommendation reports. Those interested can view the recommendation reports online on the city's website or in person at City Hall. Those interested may also contact planning staff in person, by email, or over the phone to obtain a copy of the reports. Accommodations for alternative methods of viewing or obtaining the recommendation reports are available upon request. Please note that the zoning bylaw currently in effect in the City of Port Colborne is the City of Port Colborne zoning bylaw 6575/30/18 as amended, which I will be referring to as the zoning bylaw. I will now introduce consent application B13-23-PC and its two accompanying minor variance applications A14-23-PC and A15-23-PC. The subject lands are municipally known as 181 and 185 Welland Street in the 3rd Density Residential Zone. In application B13-23-PC, the applicant, Tuck Developments Incorporated, is requesting the committee's consent to sever for the purpose of recreating two separate lots which have merged with both an existing residential use on both the retained and conveyed lots and an easement servicing both lots. Both conveyed and retained lots require the following minor variances. In application A14-23-PC, the applicants are requesting relief from section 6.3A, B, C, and D of the zoning bylaw to permit a minimum lot frontage of 9 meters, whereas 18 meters is required, a minimum lot area of 242 meters squared, whereas 0.05 hectares or 500 meters squared is required, a minimum front yard setback of 2.18 meters, whereas 6.5 meters is required, and a minimum interior side yard setback of 0.3 meters, whereas 1.2 meters is required. In application A15-23-PC, the applicants are requesting relief from section 3.7B and section 7.3A, C, and F of the zoning bylaw to permit a minimum lot frontage of 15.41 meters, whereas 18 meters is required, a minimum front yard setback of 1.19 meters, whereas 9 meters is required, a minimum rear yard setback of 2.8 meters, whereas 6 meters is required, and a minimum driveway width of 2.59 meters, whereas 3 meters is required. Given the information in the recommendation reports, planning staff recommend application A14-23-PC and A15-23-PC be granted for the following reasons. Number 1, the applications are minor in nature. Number 2, they are appropriate for the development of the site. Number 3, they are desirable and in compliance with the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw. Number 4, they are desirable and in compliance with the general intent and purpose of the official plan. Given the information in the recommendation report, planning staff also recommends application B13-23-PC be granted subject to the following conditions. Number 1, that the applicant provides the Secretary-Treasurer with a draft transfer and a copy of the deposited reference plan, if applicable, for use in the issuance of the certificate of consent. Number 2, that a final certification fee of $231 payable to the City of Port Colborne is submitted to the Secretary-Treasurer. Number 3, that the applicant submits a topographic survey demonstrating the existing drainage patterns. If the parcels do not drain independently, a master log grading plan will be required. Number 4, that the applicant submits a revised site plan showing 2 parking spaces located on Part 3 to the satisfaction of city staff. Number 5, that minor variance applications A14-23-PC and A15-23-PC be approved. Number 6, that all conditions of consent be completed by July 19th, 2025. And that concludes the correspondence of these applications.
Thank you. Does the applicant or agent for the applicant wish to add anything further at this time?
Hey guys, I'm the applicant. I gotta be honest, this is my first time doing this, so I'm not sure how I'm supposed to address everyone, but thank you very much. I would gratefully request that the topographical survey just be taken into request, that it would potentially be considered that it's not needed. The lands that are being severed were previously severed, and there's nothing being built other than what's on the lands currently. So there's no additional footprint being expanded on or built on. The properties will remain as is. So if that could be considered, that would be wonderful. And then the parking situation here, I can certainly have 2 more parking spaces drawn on the survey. However, I do see 8 parking spaces currently there, and there is only 6 units between both of the properties. I don't know if that's the proper way I'm supposed to address this. I'm so sorry, guys.
No, that's fine. Does any members have any questions? Gary and then Eric.
Thank you. Through you to the applicant, have you requested that before in either your pre-consultation or any time leading up to this meeting with the planning department?
I missed the first part of your question. The last part was have I requested a pre-consultation at any point?
Have you requested at any time to the planning department that you wish to avoid the topographical?
I only was made aware of the topographical necessity about a week ago, I would say, when this was circulated. They did mention that they would prefer to have it as in the future, if the property is sold, they want to make sure that the drainage is appropriate. However, my comment is still there, that like this was like this and has been like this for probably a century, and I'm not changing the footprint of either building. Should I want to develop it further, I could understand the requirement for a topographical survey, but I would ask for some consideration. We are working very hard to put some families in these places, and anyways. Okay.
Can I do a follow-up to the planner on that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Mr. Room. Generally, I like the idea that topographicals and drainage plans are there because it makes something that we're cleaning up from the merger to this way. What is your take on, you've asked for it, I assume you want it. There has been no discussion about you giving way on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the committee member. Yeah, that's correct. That's still our stance, is that we would like to have the topographical survey as the condition of consent. As I'm sure you're all aware, it's generally a pretty standard condition to make sure that the lots drain appropriately. Even though they were, previously existing as the way they are, we don't know what the drainage patterns are on the property, and we can't guarantee that they are going to be continued to be owned by the applicant. It's an inevitability that at some point these properties will come under separate ownership by someone else. We need to ensure that the lots don't negatively affect the drainage of a neighboring property.
Thank you. Just one follow-up. So I'm used to seeing on a new build where there's a lot drainage scheme as opposed to, I guess the topographical gives you that information, but whether it's an old one, it's a new one, or then you have to assert that it does work. And does that pick up sort of the as-built as it is now, because they're doing a new one? But it's not certified by an engineer that it is draining correctly. You're just doing it based on the grades that you see on the topographical.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the committee member, that's correct. It's just to show what the existing drainage is, because if they were independent lots at some point and they had merged together, that could, in theory, mean that they may drain independently. So the topographical survey could potentially show that, in which case, great news. But the fact of the matter is we don't know what the drainage patterns exist right now.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
Eric?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the applicant. How did you come to know that these lands merged in title?
I bought it as one property.
But were these severed previously? That's my understanding.
I came to know this information via calling the city, and I was informed that indeed these lands were two separate properties at one point, as each of the lots on this street were, and they had merged via title or something like that. Sorry, but I was informed by the city that these were two separate lots at one point, and the address also reflects that as 181-185 Welland.
Did you ever seek a legal opinion? Just out of curiosity.
In regards to whether they were previously severed or not?
Whether they merged in title.
No, I bought them as one parcel of land.
Yes. Through you to the planner, was there a previous consent on this application, or is he talking about a subdivision that was deemed?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to my recollection, there is no previous consent application on the file. As to why these properties end up merging over time, it could have just been likely because of the similar ownership. It's a head scratcher to me as to why that happens, but it's a reality that it does, especially in these older areas of the city. So the possibility is that they were merged under similar ownership. And that's pretty much all that we have to go on.
I guess just one thing I maybe caution to the applicant is just to see whether or not, or to confirm that there wasn't a previous consent, because once a consent, always a consent. So they wouldn't merge. You'd have to get a separate certificate to nullify that previous consent. So maybe something to look into in the future, depending on the outcome of this application. But in regards to the topographic survey, the parking lot that is shown on the sketch, I went to the property, it looked more like a kind of landscape area currently. Is that correct?
It is overgrown. What will be the parking lot there? Yes. Whether it's gravel, it's just overgrown. There used to be a shed there, so it's not landscaped or supposed to be landscaped. It's crabgrass / trimmed weeds.
Okay. So I guess my concern is that if you are creating a parking lot there, that will be impervious, meaning that there would be water wouldn't be able to seep into the ground, and then it would run off at a higher rate than it does previously, which then would cause drainage issues. So
we would be doing this as a gravel parking space. This would not be that my intent anyways is for gravel, not for
okay.
A paved parking space.
Okay. Either way, I see a topographic survey as being useful in determining whether or not this does adversely, whether the existing condition adversely affects neighbors. So, and as soon as you enter into a Planning Act application, these conditions are able to apply. So, those are my questions and comments.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Andrew?
sir.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to the applicant. I just would like a couple of things clarified here. For 181 Welland Street, that will remain 2 units, is that correct?
That's correct. Oh, so are you asking me? I'm so sorry.
Yes, I am, sorry.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and 185 would be 4 units then?
That's correct.
And the footprint of the of either building will not change at all?
That's correct.
Okay, so I don't know if you're aware of the problems with the with 185 Welland abutting on the sidewalk the way that it does. It's a little bit of a, well, it's a big problem in the winter, and I'm just wondering how you're going to deal with that, because you're asking for a setback less than what is required.
May I ask that you are specific with the problem during the winter? Is it snow removal?
It is definitely snow removal. The opening and closing of the front doors isn't even possible sometimes, and certainly garbage is an issue.
We would certainly have a plan in place for maintenance of snow removal as well as grass cutting, which we already have active in our maintenance and ongoing property management.
Okay, thank you. And the, have you made arrangements for garbage removal?
Garbage removal, is garbage removal not with the town?
For 181, it would probably apply, but for 185, you'd have the 4 units. There's not really anywhere for them to put their garbage.
Oh, certainly we would have large storage bins for them to dispose of, like larger bags at a time on the side of the house. And then they would be brought forth to the disposal location to be picked up by the city.
Okay. All
Well,
right,
like,
I might be at a bit, yeah, I might be at a bit of a
large
disadvantage. I don't have any of the drawings of what's proposed, but, okay, that's fine. Thank you.
I appreciate your questions. Thank you very much.
And if I might, to the applicant's question about parking, because you are severing part 3 from part 1, that lot itself, because it's a duplex, will require 2 parking spots to be on that property versus the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lots that you show on your drawing. Those 7 parking spaces are all on part 1, which is the neighboring property. So you need to make provision for 2 parking spots at the rear of the residence on part 3 that have to be within that property boundary. So I think that's what the staff report was referring to.
So may I ask a question?
Yep.
Would it be possible, my first question is, I think there is a certain amount of parking spaces needed. I'm not sure if on my application, I can't recall if we've asked for a reduction in that, but if there are a certain amount of parking spaces needed, would I be able to extend lot 3, part 3, to incorporate 2 parking spaces rather than add 2 parking spaces to the existing lot 3? Is that a possibility that would be acceptable?
I'll ask the question through Chris. I know when it comes to consents, we have some leeway with regards to boundaries and what's being asked and so on and so forth. I will turn to Chris, and maybe you can ask or answer that.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So through you to the applicant, I would have to say that if you were to make an alteration of that magnitude, I think you'd be kind of talking about bringing this back to the committee for the request. The reason really that the 2 parking spaces is being requested behind part 3 is because part 2, which is the easement, doesn't permit people to drive onto part 1. So if you're a resident of part 3, you can drive down that laneway, but once you go into the parking lot, you're technically trespassing on part 1. If the easement were to cover the entire parking area, including the driveway, then it wouldn't have been a problem. But because the easement is situated the way it is, it only technically provides access to the rear of part 3 for the people that live at part 3. There's many ways you can go about addressing it. I mean, like we've mentioned as in the report, you can have the 2 parking spaces conditionally behind part 3, and you can modify the parking area behind in part 1 as well. We don't have to necessarily leave it the way it is right now. You're only required to provide 4 parking spaces on part 1 and 2 for part 3. It's just they have to be located on each parcel. So again, if you wanted to come back with an alteration to part 3, you would have to do that at a separate meeting.
Okay. What would you recommend? What would you recommend as the best solution for success at the time being?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the applicant, I'd recommend you confer with your agent, perhaps. It's not really my purview to provide a recommendation on what you should do. It's just we're going to provide recommendations on what's proposed in front of us.
May I ask if I simply agree with what you're saying, and agree to add the 2 parking spots onto part 3, would and as long as I obviously provide a survey showing that in the near future, does that allow us to continue to move forward with this hearing today?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, that would allow us to move forward. It doesn't change anything about the decision today. It's just you would have to clear that as a condition before the final approval is given. So, however we want to clear it, you can take pictures, we can do a site visit to see the parking spaces have been installed. Either way works, and we can work with you on how to clear the condition.
Thank you. And last question in that regard then. If we went with my other question just before that one, whereas if we're looking at this site plan or the survey, and I were to take, let's say, the 2 of the parking spaces that are adjacent, touching the border of part 3 to part 1, and add those to part 3, they could drive down part 2, and they would remain in part 3 in order to access those 2 spaces. Would that be something that I could provide and continue with this hearing based on?
Through you, Mr. Chair, correct. If I'm understanding you correctly, if the parking stalls are located on part 3 and the tenants of part 3 do not need to leave part 3 to access the parking, and it meets the requirements of the bylaw, then there would be no concerns.
Just to make sure I'm that we're on the exact same page, then, if the survey is pulled up, you see part 3, and you see the backyard of part 3, and then there's adjacent to the backyard of part 3, there are 4 parking stalls we see there. If I were to provide the 2 left parking stalls that are abutting part 3 and made those part of part 3, so that those 2 parking stalls worth of land is now part 3, would that be something that would be acceptable and not need another hearing?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, I would be agreeable to that. You would just be removing the parking spaces. Like, that's kind of what the condition is referring to, is just adding parking spaces. However you want to do that, if you want to remove parking from part 1, as long as you meet the parking requirements there, staff would be satisfied with that. So yeah, if you wanted to remove the abutting, 2 or even 3 parking spaces and add them to part 3, staff would have no problem with that.
Okay, wonderful. So then I could make that decision offline and then provide the documentation of a survey showing that those spaces are included in part 1, and that would satisfy the conditions and not require a need for another hearing.
Through the chair, that's correct.
I am very grateful for your explanation. Thank you very, very much.
Now, just keeping in mind that would not be moving the property boundary, you'd just be flipping the parking spaces into the backyard of part 3.
Oh,
So I think you were thinking about stretching part 3 farther to include those spaces. Is that correct?
yes, that's correct. I was thinking of taking part 3 and the
Stretch.
2 upper left parking spaces.
Yeah.
The 2 upper left parking spaces of part 1 would become part 3. So there's a small piece of part 3 that would be into the rectangle of part 1 in his current drawing.
Right. Through to Chris. For a typical parking space, what's the length?
To
the
you,
3
Mr.
meters?
Chair, it is 2.6 meters. And just to clarify that, I was not. I had gotten my wires crossed there. You wouldn't be able to extend the length of part 3. I thought you were referring to moving the 2 parking spaces from part 1 to part 3 without making the adjustment. Yeah.
So with that, to the applicant, I guess what you're asking is, could you extend part 3? I think on the looking at the survey as it was presented, is 26.57 meters in depth right now from the front to the back. You'd be looking at extending that to say like 20, 29 meters in total. And like I say, with respect to consents, we have a little bit of liberty to alter them slightly. That's why most of the time on consents, there's a plus or minus range. On variances, however, we're not. But with regards to consents, there is some flexibility, and I would think that extending that 2.6 meters into a vacant lot for parking to include that, I don't think is that significant. On part 3, I don't believe there's an issue with the rear yard setback. That was on part 1. So you're not, causing a conflict there. You say that shed that's shown on here is removed, so there's not an issue there. So from my perspective, I think extending, instead of 26.57, your lot was 29. That would give you that space encompassing that. And I think if you just wanted to do the one spot off to the side to encompass a width to accommodate 2 vehicles, basically where they're drawn now. If that survey was altered, I know we talked about having a topographical map or a survey done of the current grading plan that's there. I think your survey is going to be out there probably at the same time doing all of that anyway. So then they can restake out those spots, and then it'd be clear where those spots would be delineated, and then part 3 would have its own required parking at the back. I'll leave it to the other members whether they think that's too significant of a change or not to allow that. And if there's other members of the public that wish to speak to this application, we can certainly hear from them if they have concerns with regards to that as well. And I don't think that would affect the variances. So from that perspective, I know we can't grant more than what's being requested, but I'm pretty sure we have a little bit of latitude, because I've seen it before in country lots where they were so far from the septic system, so they needed to push the boundary another couple meters over to get around the septic system. So if it's permitted there, I don't see why we couldn't be permitted here as well to do that slight adjustment to accommodate that. So with that, I'll leave that for discussion. Does any other members have any questions of the applicant? Eric?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, I got 2 more questions. One, the overhang. There's quite a bit of overhang on both buildings that may go into the easement. I'm just wondering, maybe it's more to the planner, whether or not that's permitted. So I think my understanding is the easements are typically clear from ground to sky.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct, and the easement in this case would only be applying to ingress and egress of the property.
Okay, because I don't think this sketch is showing what the extent of the overhang is. This would be the actual dwelling itself. So do we know whether or not a variance should have been required to address that overhang issue?
Through you, Mr. Sorry, I missed just the tail end of your comment there.
Whether maybe a minor variance should have been required as part of this application because the overhang may be encroaching.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would have to take a double check just to see what the encroachment is for eaves. There may be an exemption for eaves troughs. I
think in my experience, it's usually like to the lot line or within point, I don't know, 1.5 meters to the lot line or something like that. I'm not sure what the city of Port Colborne's is. While you're looking at that, I would like to bring up my other point, is that I'm not sure exactly what I want to clear up what's going on or what's being proposed with the driveways based on the conversation that the committee's had. But one concern I have is the privacy area, the amenity space of the dwelling on part 3, with a parking area right at the rear of it. Lights will be shined into that space and there will be no privacy really at all. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to propose, well, whether or not you've had any consideration of putting a fence to provide privacy for that dwelling on Part 3.
May I answer?
Yes.
Just a question. Am I supposed to say through you, Mr. Chair?
If you like, but yes.
All right. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Eric. I think if I'm allowed to address you like that, sir. This is a, I feel like such a novice here, guys. This is a 2-unit dwelling, and the rear of that house is brick, and the entrance to that rear dwelling is on a deck, which is on the side of the house. The stairwell up from that house is at the back of the house. So I have not considered building a fence. No.
I guess through you, Mr. Chair, would the rear yard not be used as amenity space by the inhabitants?
Through you, Mr. Chair, can you repeat the question?
So typically the rear yard, would be used as amenity space, hence why there's typically a large setback that is required there. And currently you're showing a 10-meter setback, which is fine. But my issue is that there is a parking lot right at the rear of it, and that may cause issues with the amenity space or with the inhabitants there in terms of privacy. So I guess my concern was just whether or not you've put any consideration into the privacy of that area and putting a fence, which you've provided your answer.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I have not considered the fence. However, I don't think it's a big deal to do if that would satisfy the committee here. I could do that. I don't see why not. We're here to provide the best possible living spaces for the inhabitants. So if that's deemed to be the case, then a fence shall go in.
And then I guess, sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Member Beauregard, just to clarify your point about the eaves. I did find in our zoning bylaw that eaves are allowed to encroach. The required setback is 0.15 meters from the property line to eaves trough. So I'm trying to look on my screen. It's very pixelated, so I'm having a bit of a difficult time to see what the... It's tricky because the property line is 2.59 meters away, right? So the eaves, they don't meet, or they do meet, sorry. And there's no requirement for eaves to have a distance away from an easement. So it would appear that would not be a concern for us.
Lastly, through you, Mr. Chair, to you, there was some discussion regarding you had some discussion regarding the parking and making some amendments. If you can just clarify that, just because I was getting lost.
Yeah, so basically, I don't know if you have the drawing up in front of you of the layout. So if you look at part 3, on the left side of the drawing, it shows from front to back as 26.57 meters plus or minus. I guess basically to include those two parking spaces at the end, that left hand, or I guess in this case northerly property boundary would extend to 29 meters, give or take a little bit, to then incorporate those two parking spaces. So when you come down the side, they'd go across the back and then into those two spots, roughly where they're located now. It's just that would form part of part 3. So you'd extend the one side of part 3 farther back, basically 2.5 meters-ish, to comply with that parking spot. And then that way they can pull in, basically park looking backwards to where those spots are now. And that would be part of part 3, instead of taking up even more space in the backyard for 2 additional parking spots, since it's a parking lot anyway. And then whether they wanted to extend right across the whole back of part 3 to make it longer and extending the easement, or just go over the width of the requirement for whatever 2 parking spots are, They can go across, so you make a little L out of the bottom and come across. As long as it's not extended so far back that now that parking area does not have a clear access across the Part 1. That's the only kind of limitation. They still have to have room to get from where that parking area is across the back and still be on Part 1 without trespassing. But I believe there's lots of room there based on the drawing that we see. So that would be my suggestion for that. Obviously, they'd have to provide another survey and drawing showing this before the consent could be issued, so that way it's clear and there's a clear description of what is being extended back. But I know in the past when we've had severances come with country properties where they're severing off a house from a farmland, we've moved property boundaries there to accommodate extra setbacks for septic systems and septic beds and weeping beds and stuff like that. We've had it go the other way where because they were encroaching on additional farmland, the suggestion was to, okay, well, you don't need that much for the house, so you got to retain the farmland. We've moved them both ways in the past. For this, we're talking a couple meters longer in the back. And I know with consents we have that flexibility that it's not hard and fast. As long as we still follow and they still complies to all the other rules and we're not reducing them. In fact, it will help with, I believe Part 3 has the variance for the lot area as well. So it'll actually help that situation because you're actually making the lot a little bit bigger. It won't obviously get to the where it needs to be, but it'll also be helping with that. So you're going to be reducing that footprint a little bit if. So that would be my suggestion. Like I said, we don't have to confirm it just a second, but certainly something that we can talk about as we go forward. So if you still have another question?
Kind of on that though.
Yep.
Through you, Mr. Chair, in the event that were to happen, how do they access those parking spots? I suppose like they would.
Well, they would still come down the easement and then have to cut across the back of the lot and into those spots.
Okay. And would those, I guess, the rear yard there, where we see to the rear lot line of Part 3, is that currently landscape space or is that also gravel? To the applicant, maybe?
I believe that the entire backyard is not greatly landscaped, so it can be put as gravel as a strip at the back, a horizontal strip at the back of that Part 3, so that they can traverse the back of Part 3 and right into their parking spots without ever touching Part 1. Is that what you were referring to?
Kind of, but then that leads me to another question as to whether or not you have enough landscape space in your property. So if it's gravel, I don't believe that counts as landscape under the definition, in which case you don't have enough landscaping. Potentially don't have enough landscape area that would meet the zoning.
May I ask that if I put those 2 parking spots in that area, I would have even less landscaped area?
Yeah.
That wasn't an issue with that.
But if it doesn't comply with the zoning with landscape, then it's still a concern that I have. So maybe to staff, if they reviewed the landscape requirements.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the member. Yeah, that's where my mind was going as well. I do think that there are a lot of potential solutions to parking. But yeah, the landscape would be a concern of mine as well because gravel does not count towards the landscaped area.
Could they traverse across grass?
That's right.
They can't. Technically, I could leave it grass and they're allowed to drive over it.
At this time, through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not feeling too comfortable going through with this application. But there's too many unknowns at this point and too much going off a whim. So I'll just leave it at that.
Fair? So, Angie?
Thank you. Through you, I just have another question for the applicant with respect to fencing, privacy fencing for the 4 residential properties that are going to be impacted by this this change. Do you plan to do privacy fencing for those properties? No, did we lose him?
No, I'm here
okay.
through you, Mr. Chair. I'm unaware of which properties you're referring to that will be affected by the change.
Okay, you have 4 residential properties that your property abuts, and if you're going to be developing your property in any way, cleaning it up, changing it, adding parking areas and that sort of thing, I would think that adding a privacy fence around it would be the wise thing to do. I just wondered if you have plans to do that.
I believe there is currently fencing around that entire area as it stands.
Fencing from your property, or you're talking about some of the neighbors do have fences?
Are you able to see my screen by chance? If I were to hold up something to my camera, to my face,
We could give it a shot.
There is, if you see the 2 properties at the bottom left, there is fencing existing. If you look at satellite view from
Okay.
Google Maps, you can see the existing fencing that would have privacy. And at the rear, there is large, fully matured trees that provide that privacy as well.
Okay, so your answer is you're not going to be adding any fencing. That's all I needed to ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
If I might, to the applicant, just another quick question. So right now, the property at 185 is currently a 4-plex, correct?
Yeah.
Correct.
And there's currently tenants living in that 4-plex?
No.
Has there ever been tenants living in that 4-plex? The reason I ask the question is I'm on Street View, and it looks like at the time Street View took their images of the street, and I look at the property. It looks like I see 4 meters.
Yeah.
It looks like there's window coverings, and I
There
see
was-
2. Sorry, and I see that there's 2 cars parked in that vacant lot that's on the side, which isn't part of the property. I guess my question is, it doesn't look like that cars have been parking at the rear of Part 3 as proposed here. They've been parking on that vacant lot and technically trespassing because that's not part of the same parcel of land. It might have been at one time, but it's not currently. So I guess that's my concern, is that it doesn't look like they're driving to the back now, or were. You're saying currently you don't have tenants in there, but anyway, that would, I understand what your proposal is to drive between those 2, but it doesn't look like in the past that's what was transpiring. They were parking illegally on that vacant lot beside the property. So anyway, and to that fence, if there is a fence, is that legally your fence on the property, or is that like a mutual fence that was up there? On the survey provided, it doesn't show a fence. I guess, if we made this the severance a condition, because that is a parking area that you'll have parking facing the residents on the opposite street. I can see us making that a requirement to have fencing because of that parking, and you'll be shining lights in the backyard of the property on fares. Especially if it's not your fence, because then if it's not your fence, you wouldn't be under any obligation to maintain that fence, whether it's mutual or otherwise. So I guess maybe that's to your point that you're asking.
Absolutely.
So that, again, something to be considered, and if the committee so desires, we can add that as a condition of the severance, that fencing be put there, because now the parking will be at that rear portion of that lot. Is there any other committee questions? I do want, we have a few people in the audience, and I just want to see if there's anyone that wants to speak to this application, so I will open it up to them. If you will, if you could just come over to the side, there's a little microphone in the front there. There's a little red button in the middle. If you could just push that, state your name and address for the record, and please ask away. No, right over on the. There you go. Just your name and address for the record.
My name is Gabriel Fortin, and so is my wife, Sue Fortin. We live on 15 Lewis Street. And the concern about this is we own that property on 15 Lewis Street. Is you'll see on the picture, it would be lot 843. And the back of it, we own some of it. We don't have a fence. And the fence he's talking about, that's our fence also. And we've been there over 40 years. No one parks in the back because it's too tight. And most of the time they destroy our fence. And there's no drainage. It's a pond in the back, all the way in the back, because our lot sits higher than their lot. So I don't know. And most of the time what they're doing, they come in from the empty lot between my fence and the other property, the old building. They squeeze in between to use that as a driveway that's crossing someone's property they've been doing some repair, and most of the time they hit my fence. I has to be repaired. No one fixed nothing. It's always a constant battle with whoever's doing the work. And it's a mess. It's always been a mess. And I don't know how they could deal with what they're trying to do, especially if you have a vehicle that's big enough to get in, and where are you going to put your garbage? Where are you going to remove the snow in the back in the winter time? You have no place to move anything. So that's my concern.
And our garage is butted. There's part fence and part of my garage.
Yeah, we own roughly maybe less than 2 feet behind. And you use our garage wall as a freaking stop. We're not too pleased on that either. So what he's saying and what I'm going to do, I disbelieve what they were saying anyway, because I've seen what happened over the years. So the change they want to do, I don't know. Well, maybe we'll have to see the change.
But some things you have to cover that laneway because you know they're going to be using it.
Yeah.
They always have.
Yeah.
Coming in off of Lewis Street in behind us.
That's right.
And
They've been doing it for years.
It just barely fits. Even the contractors with their dumpster, they just bashed into it at the beginning of the year, broke the part of the fence. He repaired it again.
Yeah, I repaired the fence twice this year. And
with the mirrors open, they barely fit. There's not enough there. So
they might be, let's say, 10 feet. You could squeeze in 10 feet in there. Like, it's illegal to get in there. We tell them, not only that, it's only dirt. If you got a heavy equipment backing up, what's happening to my fence? The poles start doing that, right? Because it's black dirt. So even though the poles are in concrete, but it makes the shifting, everything out of whack. It's just not too pretty. And
so, if I might, so do you own the vacant lot at the corner?
No, that's Peter, the owner of the hotel. Okay. Is the owner of
from across the street.
Yeah, he owns the lot.
Okay.
like I said, we've been there for a long time. We've seen a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Is there anything further you'd like to add?
I think we covered pretty well everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I'm assuming there's no one online to speak to this application. Okay. Eric?
Through you, could the applicant maybe address the comments that were provided if he so chooses?
Yes, I would love to through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the people that came up to speak just now. I have taken everything to heart. I have not owned this property for more than a couple years, so to speak to what's been done from the previous tenants, I apologize on their behalf. And I cannot again speak to what they did. So I'm sorry that you've been going through that. This has not been my property for very long. It was recently acquired. I I hope you will appreciate that we will be putting some really wonderful people in there. I don't know if it makes any difference to know that there was a federally a warrant out for one of the tenants in this building as a criminal, and this is the type of tenant that was there before, and we were successful in getting that tenant out of your neighborhood and providing a safer and going to provide an absolutely gorgeous building for people to live in. And with all of the people out of that 4-unit, there is no one who is conditioned or has the habit of driving through that area that you reference, nor are they conditioned or have the habit of using that vacant land on the corner as a parking spot. So having all new tenants, we will have very strict instructions on where they will park. They will have parking spaces that they are assigned and to be used, and they will enter through the front of the property because that's how they'll be directed. I intend to have very strict rules on how the properties are used. I apologize hearing about your fence. I never once heard about a fence that needed to be repaired since I've owned the property. This will be the first time that has ever reached me. I am very accommodating with the things I do. I do everything by the books. If there's a need to help you in a way with your fence, I will do so. If an alleyway needs to be blocked off, it will be done. But you can be assured that the tenants that you had issues with and the recklessness that you experienced will not continue, because they will be brand new and better tenants compared to the quality that was there previously.
Okay. And there's no one else here to speak to this application. So with that, if the applicant wants to add any further comments to this at this point, or if committee members, if there's any additional questions, hearing that. I know, Eric, you expressed some concerns about issues about moving property boundaries and landscaping. I'll leave it to you to discuss. From my perspective, how you orientate those parking spots, whether you continue to leave them running east-west, or you turn them so they're north-south and extend the easement. Actually, the easement is for the other part, but you'd have to extend that lot so they can at least come to the end of the existing Part 3 to turn to park into those two spots. Maybe that would address the buffering issue. I'm certainly comfortable with extending, if instead of 29 meters, if you needed 30 meters to get you that buffer. I don't know what the buffering requirement would be between the parking and the rear yard. If you needed to extend a little bit more to obtain that, or maybe that one parking spot has to then come up a little bit higher from the current drawing that's shown on Part 3 to obtain that buffering at the rear. I'm comfortable leaving it with staff to, as long as that is provided to them and they're satisfied with it meets the buffering requirements, and they have a drawing to prove that. I'm perfectly good with that. I do agree that the fencing issue and privacy that was brought up, as well as to the applicant, or sorry, the members of the public here that spoke to that. I think adding a fence to, or continuing that fence, it looks like there's one existing on the southern portion is pretty much there, extending that to the back, as well as continuing to make sure there's privacy fencing in and around the parking area at the back to make sure that there's no light intrusion on the neighboring properties. I'm also good with that if we want to add that as a condition to be added and maintained. With that, Eric.
So through you to, I suppose, the applicant or to planning, one other concern is that with the with the garage of the neighbor being used as the fence, essentially, there's no. My understanding is, based on the comments and based on Google Earth, that garage is pretty well used as a fence. Parking, if putting a parking stall right next to it risks damage to the neighboring property owner's property. Unless a fence is created that goes around or protects that garage, I don't know how this is going to work. And if you lose a parking stall out of putting a fence there, then I believe you would be deficient that much parking, correct?
Correct me if I'm wrong, they require one spot per unit?
Okay.
It looks like they have ample parking there.
Okay.
If you lost one to that, I think there's still ample spot.
Okay.
And I guess to your point, my suggestion would be to have a requirement that the fence come down the southerly portion, across the back, down and around, all the way around, so that way that back lot is fenced, so that way the light does not encroach on the neighboring properties.
And it's not just so much the light as it is also the just the damage to potential damage of property to
Yeah,
the
you still drive through a fence.
It's true, but at least it provides some protection.
Yeah. Angie?
Thanks, through you. I think that the point is a fence to the south and to the east is what's required. That's where your residential components are. That's where the various building sheds and garages and things come right up to the property lines. So it would make more sense to have the fence there, and for it to be a privacy fence. That just makes absolute sense, and move forward that way. But I would like to agree with what Eric had said earlier. I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the whole movement of the lines as well. I'd like to clarify that before we go ahead and try to make any kind of decision, so we have something absolutely clear.
Well, like I say, with regards to just extending basically the depth of the lot by 2.5 meters, would be what I would suggest, so that way it encapsulates that current parking spot.
The depth of part 3? Is that what
Correct.
you're talking about?
Yes.
The entire lot line? The entire eastern
length of
lot
it,
line?
or whatever they need to do to make that.
That's what I'm saying. Can we be clear on what has to happen?
Well,
so that
from-
we're giving consent to,
Yeah, I guess to our point, we're giving consent that they can sever the lot. We have a proposal in front of us. I guess if you don't feel comfortable with staff accepting that, we can ask for an adjournment and ask for a revised survey so you know exactly what it is. Or if you want to just say that they can extend part 3 all the way back to 30 meters, and then it's just straight across the back. And
Okay, so what you're proposing is that we agree to allow the lot to be severed, and we agree that it should be put in staff's hand, and they'll have to negotiate what change has to be made.
yeah, because they may
To
need an
satisfy
extra
all the-
half a
all the
meter or
requirements.
meter to satisfy buffering
Okay.
that Eric brought up.
Okay, so can we get, I just would like that to be part of any decision we make, that wordage. to
Oh,
make sure
100%.
We're really clear on this.
Yep.
Okay.
If I could just add, precise language is very, very helpful. The only thing I would avoid is using exact numbers when it comes to this, because there might be situations that arise that if we don't want to handcuff ourselves by saying 30 meters and that's the maximum, right?
And like I say, to that point, we could say 30 meters plus or minus to accommodate buffering at staff's discretion.
Yeah, as long as we're just really clear on exactly what
Yep.
the intent is, so that, that's the decision, not anything else.
Yep, I'm perfectly fine with that.
Okay.
Eric?
One concern regarding kind of reshaping the boundaries is that then the lot will be irregularly shaped, which is something that is, well, potentially, depending on what we're doing, which is something we typically try to avoid. You like to have like a standard shaped lot. So I know we could do it. It's just something that does concern me to a certain extent. So I'm not sure if Mr. Room has any comments on that.
Sure, yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. I mean, we are kind of already dealing with an irregularly shaped lot. Part 1, if approved, will be irregularly shaped as well. So, it's, you hate to make another one, but it's a very unique circumstance. I feel like we can all recognize that. There is also a scenario where they might not even necessarily have to. If they pull the entire boundary of the lot down, that may be an option as well. That way part 3 is still rectangular in nature. But I think that there is an element here that we need to recognize that this is a very unique situation and it will call for a pretty unique solution.
If I might through to the applicant, would you have any objection to extending the entire back portion of part 3, an additional 2.5, 3 meters, something like that, to accommodate the parking and the easement?
Mr. Chair, I am open to whatever the planning and the committee decide is the best decision. I am here to be as accommodating as possible in order to get, in order to be successful, create the privacy, make the neighbors feel comfortable, and the city feel proud and comfortable with the severance that is before them. So if the city has a preferred way of doing this, I would be willing to do so.
Yeah, I think the only limiting factor, how far back you can go, is the fact that you can't go all the way back roughly 30 to 37 meters, in which case then you would isolate a parcel in the back where you can't access from the parking area to the dwelling. So as long as there's enough room to do that, I don't think going back an extra 2.5, 3 meters is going to get into that zone. Like you can almost go all the way back to the back of the building that's currently existing on 185. I would say be the limit. I don't know what that dimension is, but certainly try to keep that as short as possible to make sure that they at least have a walkway from the parking area across into the back, and they're not trespassing on part 3 to get to that, because then you run into a reverse easement again, going the other way. But like I say, I'm comfortable with extending that property line if everyone hears, if we want to set maybe a limit and say not to exceed a certain amount, whatever that number is. Instead of 30, make it 31, and then leave it as short as possible to the staff's discretion, as long as they get the survey to show what it is. I'm good with that. Like, it's just parking space. So whatever addition you make to part 3, it's reducing the amount of reduction to the lot coverage, or adding to the lot area, if you will. So you're improving the variance that they're asking for in that case too. So you're fixing one problem, and you're eliminating or reducing the other variance that's being asked for.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to our planner. I don't see measurements of these parking spaces. So are you able to confirm that these parking spaces are technical parking spaces? They meet the technical requirements of parking?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd have to defer to the applicant on that, just because we don't have the information on it.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can have the surveyor add the measurements of those parking spaces to the plans.
So, okay, because I get, and then the other part is, like, that one parking space again would be, well, could be obstructed. But if you're putting a fence there, it doesn't matter anyways. But if there isn't going to be a fence, if it's obstructed on one side, I'm not sure if our zoning has some type of language where you have to have a greater buffer on if you're obstructed on one side, or if you're obstructed on two sides. So I don't. Yeah, Chris, I'm not sure if you can speak to.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Member Beauregard. Yeah, the requirements do change for the width. Standard is 2.6 meters wide, but if it's obstructed by one side, it does grow, and if it's obstructed on both sides, which I don't think would be the scenario here, but obstructed both sides is also a wider requirement as well. Off the top of my head, I believe that obstructed on one side is 3.2 meters required for width.
So with it at 3 meters, you can almost fit 4 spots back there. That's what they show. They're only required, well, I guess they're required to have 4, so. It would fit. even at 3 meters. Be very
Yeah,
close.
sorry, I just found it. The correction, one side obstructed is 3 meters in width.
And is this considered one side obstructed? Is that because you can't like back out sideways?
If there would be a fence on the one side of the parking stall, you would consider that to be one side obstructed, yeah. So it seems that with the fence requirement, you would likely have 2 stalls on either end that are one side obstructed by the looks of it.
So those spots would have to be wider? And then the other ones in the middle,
They can be 2.6 meters.
I would think you should have plenty of room there to do that, as well as still have some space around the perimeter of that to the fence. Now, like I said, if your desire is, we can, to the applicant, is there an extreme urgency to have this severance wrapped up today? We could make it a condition that this plan come back to the committee to make sure that this all meets, or we can adjourn it and ask for a better survey of the layout to make sure that it meets all of those requirements with the new proposed length. We're 3 weeks away from our next meeting. We could adjourn it and throw it on the next agenda just to get that drawing and finalize that, so then that way everyone's very clear on it, and then we don't have to add any of these extra conditions and make it clean at that point if that's the desire. Gary?
If we could say, subject to the satisfaction of the planning committee, of the planner, in that he's heard all these requirements tonight, we could wrap it up tonight, but I think Chris and Dan have gotten enough information tonight to know what the desire is of the committee and these suggestions. But I'll defer to Chris if you like. Chris, do you think you've captured enough of this?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Member Bruno. Yeah, I think we all understand the parking complexities, but I also think we all understand that there are a lot of options available. Like we could go with the original requested as well. That's always an option too. There's plenty of options considering adjusting the property lines as well. We would be agreeable to that. Following the same vein, if they needed to alter the length of the easement a little bit as well to accommodate. I think that there are multiple options here that we can weigh to find a suitable solution.
Say that in regards to, on the record, the applicant's willingness to do whatever to satisfy not only the spirit of what we're talking about here, but his neighbors as well.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? Eric?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if we were to adjourn it, would there be enough time to set up notice for the next meeting, to meet the notice requirements?
If I might, with regards to an adjournment, you don't need to send notice again. We've started the hearing. This is the hearing. Whoever's here is here. We can set the adjournment as long as the applicant feels that he can get to his surveyor and he can draw it up appropriately as to where the property boundary adjustments are. If he can capture that current topography or the current lot grading plan that's existing, even better. Otherwise, that would remain as a condition as currently recommended. With regard to adjourning a meeting, you don't need to send notice. We've already started the hearing. So this would be just a continuation. Ideally, if we can put it as the next meeting date, there's the notice right there. If you're interested, they're here. If they're not, then...
Okay, because deferral then would require new notice. Because I've experienced it with other municipalities where they require new notice and to meet the notice requirements. So.
Deferral, if I may, I don't want to go down this slippery slope again. We've been on this topic many times. A deferral would be we hadn't started the discussion at all. Yes. That's the difference. And that would require notification, yes, because you hadn't started the actual application. In this case, we've started it. We're asking for some clarity. We can get that at the next meeting. Should be a relatively quick and easy thing as long as everyone agrees with the new drawing, if that's the desire. I'm of Gary's opinion. I think staff has enough information. I'm quite comfortable that they can tweak a property line to make it work. If they can't, that's the condition, that they make it work, then it gets denied. I guess that's the limitation. Worst case, if they can't move it, make it work, it stays where it's at, and the minimum that you see on your drawing now is what you're approving. And you will give staff and the applicant some flexibility to work a little bit of magic between those two and make it work to satisfy the concerns of the others. I do think adding the fence is a good condition to add to the lot part 1 for that issue, and we can certainly add that, I think, and that wouldn't be an issue.
Through you, just wondering if this were to be, if the committee so choose to adjourn, would staff be able to provide written conditions for our consideration at that time that would be different from the ones that are provided today?
Well, I guess if we adjourn, we need to know why we're adjourning. You'd want something very specific that's going to come back, and if it's a matter of adjusting the lot lines to accommodate the concerns that were raised, that's one thing, and I don't think that's up to staff to do that. That would be up to the applicant to do that. If it then raises additional conditions, I don't know why it would, because it's not there now, so I don't know why it would raise additional conditions, but I guess it could. Staff could then comment at the next meeting and say, well, we've done this, so we should add this condition because of this. That could come back as well, I guess, and could be a consideration for committee members to discuss as well. But like I say, I'm on Gary's. They know what we want. If they can work out a solution that moves that property line a couple meters, satisfies the parking, still leaves lots of rear yard for part 3 for the tenants that are there, we can address the lighting issue. I don't, in my opinion, I don't see why it would need to come back. I'm quite confident staff and the applicant can work it out. There seems to be ample space to be able to do that. It's not like we're trying to split hairs here by a couple millimeters either way. I think there's ample space there to adjust that property line. I'll go on a limb almost as much as 5 meters if needed, but I think there's lots of room there that they can, like worst case, if they had to narrow up and there's only 3 at the back, there's probably enough room to put 3 spots this way, 2 are for part 3, the one beside it is for part 1, and that makes the 3 at the bottom, and that's 4. Like I said, to Chris's comments, I think there's ample room here to figure something out quite easily, in my opinion. Angie?
Thank you. Through you, I would tend to agree with you. I have that same level of discomfort that Eric has been expressing, but that's because I'm never comfortable with half applications. I wish it had come in and it was fulsome, but it wasn't. So that's just the way that is. But I do believe that staff does understand what we want. I just want to make sure that the addition of fencing around all the parking areas to the south and to the south and to the east. Those are the issues. That is it. That it be good high privacy fencing. That be added in there as a condition, and I'm okay with the rest. I've had my questions answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Gary, Eric, anything more?
Through you, one of my main concerns at the time, like we can address on the floor this issue regarding the fencing, the parking. I agree with that. In regards to, there's 2 things that are kind of really causing me some delay. It's one, the zoning bylaw, whether this application does conform with the landscape requirements, conforms with the encroachment requirements, and I'm just wondering how staff would be able to deal with that if this were approved today. Like, I don't want the applicant to find out that this doesn't conform to zoning, and then they got to come back with a new minor variance.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just to confirm, you mean if it's approved on the condition that they alter their plan slightly?
No, just as it is now. It seems like there was questions regarding landscaping and whether or not it actually meets it, and whether or not there's potential encroachment issues with the eaves and gutter.
Yeah. As the recommendation was provided in the staff report, it would meet the zoning requirements. However, if there are alternative changes to the width of or the length of the Part 3, or they're making alterations to parking, we don't know if they're going to be able to meet the zoning requirements at that time. If it's discovered that they need a minor variance for another reason, then so be it, and they might have to come forward for another one. But that is just a reality of the possible decision.
Okay.
I guess to your point, Eric, if moving the property line doesn't work, as a minimum, they'd be back to this plan. And he's just gonna have to put 2 parking spots in the back lot of the property where there currently isn't any. That's the absolute worst case scenario. I'm just saying that I would be willing to grant it, giving the flexibility between the applicant and staff to push that rear property line of Part 3 back a little farther. So that way what's designated as parking will remain parking. What is currently the perception to be the backyard of the livable space for the dwelling that's at 181 remains as large as possible. That's all I'm saying. If it turns out they can't come to something that works, then this is the minimum that they're going to get, and they'll have to just park in that 10-meter spot behind the house of Part 2.
Okay.
So with that, does someone want to make a recommendation? I don't know if you want to do them all together, or you want to do the variance.
Yeah, I'll do them in block.
Variances.
Yeah. Okay, all right, so start with, I guess the severance has to be done separately from the others, or can I just do them in block? All right, so application B13-23-PC, application A14-23-PC, and application A15-23-PC. Lands legally known as registered plan 843 on lots 22 and 23, municipally known as 185 and 181 Welland Street. That the consent application B13-23-BC be granted, subject to the conditions outlined in the staff report dated July 14th, 2023. Okay. Now are we adding and we'll add the fencing condition at this point?
Yep.
Okay. And we would add the fencing conditions there. I'll let the secretary decide on the wording for that. Okay. Okay.
Sorry, just for a point of clarity, so that would be on the southerly and
easterly.
Sorry, northerly and easterly.
No, not northerly. Southerly and easterly.
That would be the lakeside.
Lakeside is southerly,
So
and easterly is the Lewis Street side.
So you're not
Or the
concerned
Lewis
about the vacant lot
Street
beside and extending the fence all
It's
the
an
way
empty
back?
lot.
Now,
Oh, it's all right. Yeah, to the north, that would be good. Add that in. Sure. So three side wraparound, I guess it would be then. All right, northerly, southerly, and easterly then. That would be the fencing requirement, and and subject to negotiations with staff as to how to accommodate the parking requirements. Okay. For the following reasons. One, the application is consistent with the provincial policy statement and conforms to the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, the regional plan, the City of Port Colborne official plan, and will also comply with the provisions of zoning bylaw 6575-30-18 as amended. Okay. And that the minor variance application A14-23-PC be granted for the they're the same. So, and the minor variance application A15-23-PC be granted for the following reasons. The application is minor in nature, as the requested relief for the lot frontage and area appear to suit the building envelope, which retains sufficient driveway, landscaping, and amenity space from the easement and nearby parks, and surrounding parcels on Welland Street and Lewis Street are a similar size. 2, it is appropriate for the development of the site, as the proposed variance facilitates the future development of the existing duplex, and surrounding dwellings and lots are of a similar size and nature. And also, 2, that it's appropriate for the development of the site as the proposed variance facilitates the development of the existing fourplex and surrounding dwellings and lots are of a similar size and nature. 3, it is desirable and in compliance with the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw as the existing duplex and fourplex predates zoning bylaw 6575-30-18, and the lot area, frontage, and yard setbacks are not the result of new construction, but will bring the property into conformity by ensuring only one dwelling per lot and the provision of adequate parking and adequate amenity space at the private unit entrances and nearby parks. Okay, wait, I've got number 4 on the back here. Okay. It is desirable and in compliance with the general intent and purpose of the official plan as the proposed development is consistent with the scale of developments in the neighborhood and the size of the neighboring lots and residential uses. Lot creation and intensification are all permitted within medium density urban neighborhood designation of the official plan. Okay.
Thank you. Now,
Got
can I
them
get
all?
a seconder to that? Gary? Questions or comments? Eric?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just still looking at the sketch, another concern is whether or not utilities cross the proposed lot lines. We have this particular dwelling, as stated by the applicant, both these dwellings have existed for a very long time, and there's quite the possibility that services do cross these lot lines. So I would like to add a condition that the applicant is required to do a private utility locate to show that, to illustrate whether water, wastewater services cross the subject lands or end the remnant parcel. Something of that.
Friendly amendment?
We can either make it a friendly amendment or you can make a motion to add it. Gary, you're the seconder. Are you good with a friendly amendment to add that?
I'm good with that.
And that would be to the consent, correct?
Yes, that would be consent, and then also propose a second, like a follow-up to that one. If services are to cross the lot lines, that the applicant is responsible for making sure that the services are no longer cross the lot lines to the satisfaction of the engineering department or city planning department, and for both of them actually, if that's okay.
Is that all part of the same condition?
It could be the same or
two separate.
I'm used to seeing it as 2 separate conditions,
Okay.
but both to the satisfaction of the city, preferably, planning and engineering department or engineering department.
Okay, so should I be moving that as amended then?
If Gary's good with that, we'll consider it a friendly amendment and we'll add 8 to 9.
Okay.
Now, just before we go any further, to the applicant, do you understand what these additional conditions are that we've added?
To you, Mr. Chair, I understand Eric has requested that we call the utility companies and they will come provide, I'm assuming at a cost, they will come show us where the utilities are underground, and should the utilities for each one property be crossed over with the other property, it would be required via Eric's comment that I fix that so they're no longer on each other's land.
Correct. I guess the concern is in the past for older areas of the city, if these 2 dwellings were built at the same time, they might have been owned by the same owner at the time. They might have the sewer run from one building across and then they have like a mutual drain that goes out to the street and it's on one property or the other or down the property line. If that is the situation, don't know if it is or not. It's been an issue, I guess, in other areas of the city that gets remedied. Now, how that gets remedied, I guess is up for discussion. It could be the sense of you have to relocate them, or there could be an easement agreement in perpetuity to address that. That's a separate application that would need to be done to do that, but there are ways to get around it, or to work it out so that it is in compliance. But that's basically the intent, correct me if I'm wrong, of your concern here. Above ground utilities, obviously they can move around, and usually the power and cable and everywhere else, they're the ones that have to seek those agreements if they do exist. But it's really the below ground, the water, gas, sewers, I don't know, whatever else comes in underground. Those are the primary ones. Just to make sure that each dwelling is serviced directly into the city system or the utility that's supplying them, and they're not like a mutual shared thing. So that's, and I know Gary has a question if you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that, because I think, though, that Eric's recommendation is first wasn't just a blank remedy period after that. It was to set them, I thought you were saying that the utilities would have to rectify them, or that there's probably more the comment, the interpretation of the applicant said that to us. Whereas he doesn't have to have the utility companies rearrange the underground servicing. He has that option of remedy, which is an easement. So yeah, maybe you had said it right, but I think the applicant understood it differently.
Yeah.
So as long as the applicant understands it, it doesn't mean he may have to move them. It also could mean he could do an easement. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, Gary, thank you. I appreciate that clarification and your support.
All right. And Eric?
So just for further clarification, it would be to the satisfaction of the city. So if the city is satisfied, then that's all that matters in that regards. But just to the applicant, I deal with these in my day job. So you would hire a private utility locate company. You wouldn't contact like one call or them, because those are for actual, if you're going to dig. You'd hire like, I don't know, PVS or Ontario Utility Locates. They would come in and they would do a private locate for you at a cost of around, I don't know, $300, let's say. It's approximate.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Eric.
Any other questions or comments? Any other questions or comments on all three of these? The motion on the floor is as presented with the friendly amendments of those three additional, well, I guess two additional friendly amendments. So with that, if there's no other questions or comments, sorry? Gary seconded. Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. So with that, any other questions or comments? Comment? All those in favor? Opposed? That'll be carried. So there you go. That was a mouthful for you. There is a waiting period for all of these, 20 days. However, you can start the process of remedying those. Hopefully staff has enough direction from the committee as to where their latitudes are. They can help you with making these adjustments as need be to still comply with the requirements. With that, good luck, and look forward to seeing some nice new residential dwellings in our city.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you, everybody, very, very much. I appreciate all the feedback and the comments, and also whatever it's worth, the city has been absolutely fantastic to work with, including Chris and his team. So I'm sure we'll be able to come to a solution. They're absolutely amazing to work with. So thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you. So with that, is there any other business from anyone? Not seeing any. Just as a note, I did provide some comments to committee members with regards to my time at OACA conferences that we shared. So if there's any questions or comments, or anyone else has any other things they'd like to add, feel free to ask. Can I get a mover and a seconder for the minutes of the June 14th meeting? Eric and Gary, all those in favor? That'll be carried, and I will consider this hearing adjourned.